Hi, everybody. So, right now I'm streaming on both channels. And before I continue, I need to make sure y'all can hear me because I just did a whole live stream and nobody could even hear me. I guess I'm going to have to do that all over again for the anti-natalist. But for the person here who's here, can you hear me? Because I'm about to get started and I just don't want to start talking and no one can hear me. So, um, can you post a comment or something and let me know you can hear me? All right. I guess I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I guess I'll check back. It doesn't look like I'm on mute, so I assume that y'all can hear me. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Um, Gosh, what is? All right. So I'm going to address why people are saying that overpopulation is a myth, and I'm going to actually directly address the systemic and social issues that are directly impacted by overpopulation, how it relates to democracy, the economy. A lot of people don't even know what overpopulation is. It's not a myth. They just don't know. They just don't understand the argument. It's an economic argument, or it's an economic theory which came from Thomas Malthus. Which um, let me just go ahead and get started and just explain to y'all what it actually means. So overpopulation isn't about cramming bodies into available space, right? Because that's what everyone believes. Everybody believes that because you can theoretically cram everybody on a planet into the state of California, that means that overpopulation is a myth. That's not what it means. Let me just explain some terms to y'all. First of all, population density refers to the number of people per unit of area, but overpopulation is better understood through carrying capacity. The maximum number of individuals an environment can sustain indefinitely without degrading the environment or reducing quality of life, right? So it's mostly about quality of life, but you can also factor in the environment. It's about sustainability. And so, yeah, theoretically, you can increase the population, but there's consequences for that. Can somebody let me know? Okay, you can hear me. Good, because I'm about to get started. I'm about to really get into this, and I don't want to go too far without y'all being able to hear me. Again, for those of you who were just in that live stream, I apologize for the mic problems. I guess I'm going to try to do that live stream again tomorrow. But right now, we're talking about overpopulation, and this relates both to anti-natalism and anarchy. So this directly relates to both channels. So I'm streaming on both channels right now. So I just told you, population refers to the number of people per unit of area, and overpopulation is about carrying capacity, right? The maximum number of people that can be sustained indefinitely without degrading the environment or reducing quality of life. Quality of life encompasses access to resources, living space, employment opportunities, clean air and water, healthcare, education, and the ability to participate meaningfully in society. Um, Now, when this original theory was posited by Thomas Malthus, it's really about being able to feed a population, but that was really about a local economy. But because we have a global economy, I guess the dynamics have changed substantially. Um, I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but there's trade-offs that happen when you have a global economy, and so I guess that economic theory really needs to be revisited to explain how it works globally. But it's real the overarching theory still is valid. The premise is valid. It's just that you're going to have to add some extra variables when it comes to it. So the Malthusian theory was developed by economist Thomas Malthus in 1798, who argued that population growth tends to outpace the growth of resources and that we would need to sustain that population. So those who are against this theory claim that technological advances can increase food production, but they ignore that these advances come with significant trade offs in sustainability, environmental health, and food quality, right? Because as long as you can sustain a population, then that's fine. They don't care about the negative impacts or the consequences, right? You can feed a population, but does anybody really believe that we have access to quality food? Most of us don't have access to quality food. And this is a conversation that's been ongoing, that there's pesticides, there's hormones. Why do we have to mass produce food? Why do we have these factory farms? It's because of overpopulation. The fact that we have factory farms in and of itself proves that that overpopulation is not a myth. Because there's 8.5 billion people, and even if you want to go with the vegan argument, that we could just go plant-based, that still isn't sustainable. That still isn't regenerative farming. That still isn't ruminant animals replenishing the soil. It, no matter how you try to spin it, overpopulation is not a myth. And you can look at all of the mechanisms that society has concocted to compensate for overpopulation to prove that overpopulation is not a myth. If overpopulation wasn't a myth, then we would have sustainable farming, local economies. We would, I guess I need to address the arguments, and then I'll address them one by one. So, Malthus was specifically opposed to government intervention and population dynamics because he understood that such intervention could artificially inflate population beyond natural carrying capacity. This is how we were able to get to 8.5 billion right now, because of government intervention. Some people can say that this is cruel, but nature has a way of balancing itself out. And so when you go beyond carrying capacity, nature will basically take care of itself, right? In the past, people would die due to disease, due to famine, but because of modern advances, people don't die. And I'm not saying that people should die. Y'all know I'm an anti-natalist, so if we had our way, there would be no people dying because there would be no people born in the first place. But what I'm saying is because of those natural checks and balances, they have been eliminated through government intervention. Now we are at 8.5 billion. Now we can have infinite population growth. I did a video talking about how humans are the only species on the planet that really don't have a natural check, that we can have infinite population growth, whereas most animals do. So Malthus recognized that when governments provide welfare, food assistance, healthcare subsidies, and other support systems, they enable population growth that would otherwise be naturally limited by resource constraints. And that's not to say that I'm being cruel. I don't think that there should be a social safety net, that I'm advocating for a wealthy. That's not what I'm saying. I guess what we're talking about right now are the ecological consequences of government intervention. I mean, for those of you who are anti-natalist, I mean, gosh, I'm trying to walk a line. That's what I was in that live stream where y'all can hear me. I was talking about that. I'm trying not to offend people, and I'm trying to be fair to both sides. But just for the sake of this live stream, I'm really presenting academic arguments. I'm not really trying to be PC, or I'm just talking about what the consequences are of government intervention and how overpopulation has negatively impacted everybody's quality of life. So I just want y'all to understand this. I'm not saying that poor people should starve. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about economics and public policy. So again, we would not have reached 8.5 billion if it wasn't for massive government intervention. This is exactly what Malthus warned against. Government policies that override natural population controls create unsustainable demographic growth when people can reproduce without bearing the full economic cost of raising children, when government subsidize large families, when international aid props up population beyond local carrying capacity, the result is exponential growth that inevitably leads to resource depletion and quality of life decline. Um, I'm going to give some examples because I know this sounds like this is far fetched, but to me, this is very axiomatic that without government intervention, a lot of we wouldn't have the problems that we have. And we keep talking about climate change and all this. It's because of the intervention. The irony is that modern critics of Malthus point to our recent population levels as proof that he was wrong, right? Because they're saying that because we have 8.5 billion, that means that overpopulation is a myth. That does not disprove his point. When in reality, we've reached these levels by implementing the exact government interventions he argued would make the problem catastrophically worse. Modern demographers use the term like ecological overshoot when a population's demands exceed the environment's ability to regenerate resources. We're not talking about theoretical future problems, we're describing our current reality. Let's start with the common argument. If you cram everyone into an area the size of Texas or California, there would be plenty of room. The argument reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what overpopulation actually means. Yes, technically, you could fit 8 billion people into a relatively small geographic area, but what would their quality of life be? They'd be crammed into tiny living spaces, stuck in endless traffic jams, competing for limited job opportunities, and dealing with infrastructure that simply cannot support that density. Think about it this way. Imagine a two-bedroom apartment that starts out with just two roommates. They have plenty of space, privacy, and easy access to the bathroom, kitchen, and living areas. The quality of life is good. They can relax, have friends over, and live comfortably. Now imagine that apartment gradually fills up. First, 5 people, then 10, then 15, and eventually 20 people all living in the same two-bedroom space. What happens? Suddenly, everyone's fighting over bathroom time. People are sleeping on floors and closets, wherever they can find space. Privacy becomes non existent. The refrigerator can't hold everyone's food. People are arguing over who gets the kitchen when. Noise levels become unbearable. Simple tasks like taking a shower or making breakfast become sources of conflict and stress. The apartment hasn't physically shrunk, but the quality of life for everyone inside has plummeted dramatically. Resources that were abundant for 2 people, bathroom access, kitchen time, quiet space, and storage become scarce and contested when spread among 20 people. That is exactly what's happening on a global scale. The earth hasn't gotten smaller, but we have packed more people into it, and we're fighting over the same resources, infrastructure, and opportunities that were once more readily available. This is a common sense applied to a planetary scale. Now let's look at what 8 billion people have already forced us to do to sustain ourselves and the facts that are already clearly visible. The housing crisis, right? So right now we have skyrocketed housing costs in cities worldwide as more people compete for limited space in desirable areas. Now, people love to blame corporate speculators like Blackstone for buying up properties and driving up housing costs. They'll tell you it's not overpopulation causing the housing crisis, it's greedy corporations manipulating the market. But here's what they're missing. Blackstone and other corporate speculators can only profit from the real estate because there's massive demand created by too many people competing for limited housing. Think about this logically. If there were abundant housing relative to population, if supply exceeded demand, what would happen to properties that Blackstone bought and held empty? They would just sit there, costing the company money and property taxes, maintenance, and opportunity costs. Empty houses in a market with low demand are financial liabilities, not profit centers. Blackstone can only charge premium rents and flip properties for profit precisely because there's a desperate need for people willing to pay what they're asking. Remove the population pressure, and suddenly those investment strategies become unprofitable. This is a basic supply and demand economics that people conveniently ignore when they want to blame corporations instead of blaming the root cause. If housing supply exceeded population demand, corporate speculation would collapse overnight because there would be no one willing to pay inflated prices for abundant housing. The housing crisis isn't caused by corporate greed. Corporate greed is simply exploiting the housing crisis caused by overpopulation. You can't have a shortage without more people wanting something than there are things available. Corporate speculators are parasites feeding on the scarcity created by too many people competing for limited housing in desirable areas. People would rather blame corporate villains than acknowledge their reproductive choices contribute to the demand that makes corporate speculation profitable in the first place. It's much more psychologically comfortable to imagine that evil companies are creating artificial scarcity than to admit that actual scarcity exists due to population pressure. Now, let's get to other negative impacts caused by overpopulation. Traffic congestion in major cities has reached crisis levels. Los Angeles, uh, and just basically major cities all over the country. You can look at Philadelphia, New York, any major city, you're going to see traffic congestion. These aren't inefficiency problems. Even Austin, Texas has traffic congestion. They're the inevitable result of too many people trying to move through limited infrastructure, right? And they're going to say through engineering, you can just have some kind of technological alchemy where you can just create new roads and just keep expanding. And through technology and innovation, you can just expand. There's never going to be a brick wall that's going to there's never going to be a brick wall where you actually have to stop and accept that you have expanded too much, right? And then people are talking about the damn environment. Let's get through this list before I get into the environment. Unemployment and underemployment persist despite technological advances because job creation hasn't kept pace with population growth. We have people competing for limited positions, driving down wages and working conditions. Food quality degradation is evident everywhere. We've had to industrialize food production at an unprecedented degree. Factory farming, mass pesticide use, hormone injections in livestock. These aren't choices we've made because they're optimal. They're compromises we made because organic, sustainable farming cannot feed 8 billion people. The quality of our food has declined as we prioritize quantity over quality. We're producing food artificially because natural production methods simply cannot scale to production to feed 8 billion people. So socialists, and by the way, I guess I'm technically a socialist because I'm an anarchist, but I'm an anti-statist socialist. But socialists consistently refuse to acknowledge that population growth systemically destroys the very labor power they claim to support. When there are desperate workers available, strikes become completely ineffective. Employers can simply replace striking workers with people willing to accept any conditions. Strike breaking through abundance makes collective bargaining impossible. Union dilution becomes inevitable with large labor pools. Try organizing 10,000 competing workers versus 1,000. The solidarity becomes mathematically impossible to maintain. The more workers competing, the harder it becomes to prevent some from undercutting the group's bargaining position. Corporations explicitly use this dynamic through immigration as union busting. Excuse me. They use immigration as union busting, right? So if you don't want to work, you don't want to accept those conditions, then they're just going to bring in immigrants. And it's not to disparage immigrants, but this is basic economics. An oversupply of labor leads to depressed wages. They bring in workers who will accept lower wages, longer hours, and worse conditions, which breaks existing union contracts and destroys years of labor organizing. This creates a fundamental contradiction that socialists refuse to address. You cannot simultaneously advocate for strong labor power and policies that flood the labor market with more workers. These positions are mathematically incompatible. Every worker added to the labor pool reduces the bargaining power of existing workers. When people are desperate for any job, they cannot demand better wages, benefits, or working conditions. Population growth creates the very labor desperation that enables corporate exploitation. Many Americans advocate for socialist policies, higher living wages, universal health care, paid maternity leave, free education, and robust social safety nets. These are admirable goals that genuinely improve quality of life, but here's what advocates of these policies consistently refuse to acknowledge. The countries that successfully implement socialism typically have much lower birth rates. Look at the Nordic countries that Americans hold as socialist success stories. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland all have birth rates well below replacement rates. Most Americans have no idea about this connection. They see the generous benefits and high quality of life, but completely ignore the demographic reality that makes it possible. This isn't coincidence, it's mathematics. It's much easier to provide a high quality of life when there are fewer people competing for resources. The Nordic countries didn't achieve socialism despite low birth rates. They achieved socialism because of low birth rates. When you have smaller population, there are more resources per person, tax revenues can go further, healthcare systems aren't overwhelmed, housing markets aren't strained by endless demand, educational institutions can provide better teacher to student ratios, social services can actually serve people effectively instead of being perpetually underfunded and overloaded. But American socialists want to ignore this connection. They want Nordic style benefits with American style population growth. This isn't economically possible. You're trying to divide infinite resources among an infinite, you're trying to divide finite resources among infinite number of people. And I guess I'm going to get to it, but most of our population growth isn't really due to fertility rates anyways, mostly due to migration. Most Americans do procreate at replacement rate or below replacement rate. So our population growth is almost exclusively due to immigration, not due to native-born fertility rates. This brings us to a fundamental economic reality that population advocates refuse to address. An oversupply of labor inevitably leads to depressed wages. When there are more workers than jobs, employers hold all the power. They can pay whatever they want because there are always desperate people willing to work for less. Employees become expendable. If you demand better wages or working conditions, then there are 10 other people willing to take your place. This isn't theoretical economics, it's basic supply and demand. The same people advocating for higher wages and better working conditions are often the same people dismissing overpopulation concerns. But you cannot simultaneously flood the labor market with more workers and expect wages to rise. These positions are mathematically contradictory. Immigration increases labor supply, high birth rates increase future labor supply, longer lifespans mean people work longer, increasing current labor supply. All of these factors suppress wages by creating more competition for limited positions. The cruel irony is that the very policies meant to help workers, open immigration, encouraging larger families through child tax credits, extending working years, all contribute to labor oversupply that keeps wages low and workers powerless. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot demand socialist benefits while supporting policies that make those benefits mathematically impossible. You cannot advocate for higher wages while supporting unlimited population growth. Finite resources divided among infinite people equals poverty for everyone. And I'm going to address the whole resource redistribution argument. It really doesn't hold water. Um, the most unethical aspect of current population growth arguments is the aging population justification. The idea that we need more young people to take care of the elderly and fund programs like Social Security. This is literally a procreational Ponzi scheme. Just like the financial Ponzi schemes, it requires an ever increasing number of new participants to pay for the previous participants. Each generation needs a larger next generation to support them, leading to exponential population growth that's clearly unsustainable. It's fundamentally unethical to impose existence on human beings solely to serve as financial resources for others. These future people never consented to that responsibility. You're creating them specifically to bear the economic burden of supporting previous generations. Think about what this argument actually implies. We're supposed to create new people, force them into existence so they can work jobs to pay taxes to fund the retirement and healthcare of people who are already here. This treats human beings as economic instruments rather than individuals with their own rights to exist for their own purposes. The Social Security system was designed when life expectancy was much lower and family sizes were larger, demographic conditions that no longer exist. Instead of acknowledging that the system needs to be redesigned for current realities, we're told to create more people to prop up an unsustainable model. But here's the mathematical problem. If each generation needs a larger next generation to support them, then population grows exponentially forever. Eventually, you hit resource limits and the whole system collapses anyway. Except now you have billions of people suffering more through the collapse. The procreational Ponzi scheme is designed to fail. It just delays the collapse while creating more victims who will experience it. When confronted with these realities, proponents of the overpopulation is a myth narrative usually retreat to resource management arguments. They'll say, well, we just need better distribution problems. We just need better distribution systems, or we need governments to manage resources more efficiently. But here's the problem with that argument. Even if they're right about distribution issues, that doesn't solve the ethical dilemma. If there are currently people starving and homeless people allegedly, despite allegedly sufficient resources, then creating more people means creating more individuals who will face those same distribution problems, right? So they're saying that it's not overpopulation because if it was distributed fairly, then there would be enough to go around, right? But I mean, I guess the argument already defeats itself, because if that argument held any weight, then there would not be any homeless, there would not be any people suffering from a lack of health care. It's not being distributed equally. We don't have a socialist system. So you're going to create new children under this system when you already know that the resources are not being allocated in the way that you want. And then you're just going to click your heels 3 times and hope that magically the government is going to fix the problem. The government is not going to fix the problem. The government created the problem in the first place. So this is wishful thinking. It has no basis in reality. We have no control over global systems, government policies, or resource distribution networks. The only thing we have moral agency over is our individual reproductive decisions. If you know that resources aren't reaching people who need them now, how is it ethical to create more people who will face the same systemic failures? Notice that what the argument actually implies. It assumes that current resource management is inadequate, which means we currently don't have enough effectively available resources for our population. Saying we could manage resources better is actually an admission that overpopulation exists. It displaces the solution in some hypothetical future where perfect resource distribution is achieved. This argument essentially asks everyone to consume less and live with a lower quality of life to accommodate continued population growth. Why should existing people sacrifice their well-being to enable others' reproductive choices, right? Because they want you to sacrifice. They want you to live in a tiny studio apartment not have any land to grow any vegetables. They want you to recycle, to get a gasoline. I mean, to get a electric vehicle, to ride a bicycle to work, right? Why is it you have to make all these sacrifices when the easy solution is to simply reduce the damn population, right? You can talk about reducing consumption, but the easiest way to reduce consumption is to reduce the number of consumers, not to reproduce at infinite rates and then tell everybody else to just consume less. That really proves the whole argument of overpopulation, that the more people there are, it's going to have a negative impact on the existing population's quality of life. So if you're telling us to recycle and re- basically switch our lifestyles to what, to achieve some global environmental sustainability, right? It's a lot harder to make these extreme sacrifices than it is to simply reduce the population. It's not a sacrifice because we're all born child free. Um, it doesn't require any quality of life sacrifice to not have a child because you were born child free. It does require a quality of life change, to recycle, to get an electric vehicle, to, y'all know where I'm going. I don't even want to say it, to the V word, which I don't even think that I'm not even talking about the ethics of consuming animals. I'm talking about the environment. I don't think that even veganism necessarily does anything to address climate change. It doesn't. It really doesn't. It leads to deforestation, and um, it really displaces wildlife. I mean, the answer is right in front of everybody's nose, but they don't want to accept that. They're looking for every excuse to not accept population control as the solution. And I'm not talking about mandatory population control where they round up people and force them to get sterilized, or I guess more dystopian population control methods, which people are talking about. I'm trying to stick to my outline without getting ahead of myself, but I guess this is an appropriate place to address that. That the very people who are talking about this dystopian um, prophecy, they're basically making it come true. This is manifest destiny. They're saying that we're all going to be rounded up and thrown in FEMA camps, that we're all going to be forcibly sterilized, and yet these very same people are the main ones procreating. And their solution is always to store water, to buy some guns, to grow your own vegetables. Um, you don't think that the government has bigger guns? You don't think that they can steal your damn vegetables? This shit has happened already, by the way. This happened in the Soviet Union, where they stole everybody's um gosh, I talked about that. Um where they took everybody's food and redistributed it to other parts of the country, the people who needed it more. Um and then everybody starved. So you think that storing water and growing vegetables is going to be a solution? People are just going to take your damn vegetables. That's what's going to happen. I mean, there really is no way around it. If you don't do it voluntarily, the powers that be are going to force you to do it. Um, and you've already said that. You've already acknowledged that there is some conspiracy for population control, and yet you're going to procreate anyway, and you're going to force their hands to where they're going to have to implement compulsory population control. And this is not even going to be done at a national level. This is going to be done globally. Um, there, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories because I'm trying to stay objective. There are talks about that already, and they believe that this is necessary to save the planet because we're running a train off the damn cliff. That this is not sustainable, especially in the developed countries. That we consume 20 to 60 times as many resources as those in the third world. And everybody wants to live like us. Everybody wants to immigrate to America so that they can be high consuming um, Americans too, or whatever. It's not just Americans. Any developed country, we consume way too many resources. So we keep talking about eugenics, right? We keep talking about how population control is really about eliminating those who are poor, those in the third world. No, it's not. It's not, because those people live off the land, right? This is what I'm talking about when it comes to civilization. Um, those people have a sustainable lifestyle. They hunt, they forage, they build their little mud huts, and they don't necessarily have a negative impact on the environment. Conversely, we do have a negative impact on the environment. We consume so many more resources. We have our phones and our gas, gasoline vehicles, and our electricity and our AC, and we consume way too much meat. Um, they don't live like that. I mean, they don't really have a negative. They have zero waste, right? They make their clothing. They don't have diapers and bottles and plastic, right? They make their little clay bottles, and there is no negative impact on the environment. So their lifestyle is much more sustainable. So when we talk about population control, it's not really the third world that needs the population control. It's the developed countries. It's the high consuming Americans, the high consuming Europeans. Well, the Europeans have already implemented population control, which is why they have such a high quality of life, which is why they were able to implement these socialist policies. So they have already recognized the problem. So the Europeans are already on track. It's the United States that and Canada. We need to wake the hell up. Um, Gosh, I just went on rant. I just completely went off my outline. So, socialists have been proposing redistribution solutions for over a century. If these approaches actually work, we would see them succeeding by now. So we have small examples like Cuba or the Nordic countries, but they cannot scale to the 8 billion people on the planet because they depend on external resources, right? We have a global economy, and most of our resources are not even produced locally. They're imported from third world countries. So what happens when the global economy collapses? What happens when the US dollar collapses? We're completely fucked. Where are we going to get our damn food? We don't produce it locally, right? You think that this shit is sustainable. It's not. It's not. Those countries are going to be fine because they produce their own food anyway. Um, So natural selection applies to economic and political systems. Systems that work get adopted, systems that don't work get abandoned. Countries and systems are in constant competition for resources, talent, and prosperity. The most effective approaches survive and spread, right? So um, the reason why we have not been able to implement socialism is because it just would not work with our unsustainable population growth. It just would not. Um, and I'm going to get into the democracy problem. Um, I'm just going out of order. I guess I should do that now. No, I'm going to stick to the outline. There's a problem with democracy. This for though, because I may start losing people. I guess I'm going to address it now. Um, the problem with democracy is that overpopulation dilutes the power of the individual vote. So you have a small town that has 1,000 people, and then that same town becomes a million. The individual vote no longer matters. Now you have to form PACs and super PACs in order to have any type of voice. Now, when you write your politician, they don't care because there's so many people that your voice gets diluted. They don't actually have to be responsive to your concerns. They don't necessarily um, they don't necessarily have to represent you at all. They can just Um, they can just present whatever message they want to present, and there's only going to be a small percentage of people who are going to vote anyway. So it doesn't. It. I mean, it's the at least the collapse of society as a whole. It destroys the economy. It destroys the political system. At least the political system is not responsive to the demands of its populace. Um, and so you can't get those socialist policies that you want in the first place because the government is not responding to its people. It doesn't. Why would the government implement socialist policies when um, the corporations bribe these politicians to implement policies that benefit them? So they're never going to create socialist policies because, well, if you're not going to elect them based on the bullshit that they're pumping out, then they're just going to get rid of you and just bring in another group of people who will support their policies. So, just like the economic model, the political model works the same way. They don't actually have to respond to your demands because you are replaceable. Everybody becomes completely expendable under this model of infinite population growth. Actually, human life itself becomes worthless. You don't matter because there's so many people. Even when you watch the news, when somebody's dying, um, okay, that somebody dies every day. Who gives a shit? It's just a regular occurrence. It really has no significance. People die. Um, you just step over their body and just keep on moving. It doesn't even matter. Um, Even in extreme circumstances, like you could say, in the past, your labor would be your leverage, but I don't even think that's true, right? If you lost somebody, everybody's so damn replaceable. I mean, when I listen to these people talk about how overpopulation is a myth, I don't think they really understand how comprehensive this problem actually is. They think it's just about resource allocation. It's not. It's not. Let me see. I'm trying not to be redundant because I did go off script. Let's talk about the corporations because I already talked about the government. Corporations and governments have strong financial incentives to promote population growth, but these incentives directly conflict with your individual well-being. For corporations, more people means more consumers, more workers to exploit, and more competition among employees that keep wages low. When a labor supply is abundant, companies can treat workers as expendable. They don't need to offer competitive wages, benefits, or good working conditions because there's always someone desperate enough to accept less. More people also means more customers for their products and services. Every new person represents decades of potential consumption, housing, food, healthcare, entertainment, and technology. The corporate growth model depends on the ever expanding market of consumers. For governments, more people means a larger tax base and more economic activity. To measure as growth, politicians can point to GDP increases and claim success even when their per capita well-being is declining, right? That's what they always go by. They go by the GDP. They go by the damn stock market. So the people can be starving and unemployed and barely getting by, but they go by the damn GDP. They can justify larger profits and more government programs expanding their own power and importance, right? And I've talked about this before, how governments compete or government agencies compete for resources. Talked about how the CIA is competing with the FBI, how I don't know. I guess I could use local examples. That the Health and Human Services Department is competing against I don't know, some welfare program. It's like they want to expand their department. They want to expand their agency. And so the more people that are using their services, the more they get to justify increasing their budget. So that's how they increase their power and their political relevance by having more people using their services. So, I mean, you'll see people, they try to get more people on their programs because they're trying to justify continuing their services, right? When there's cuts, or if people, when people aren't using their services, then they're going to receive cuts. And I've done accounting. I've taken accounting courses for private businesses and government accounting. Um, Accounting for government works completely different and opposite to the way accounting works for private accounting, because with corporate accounting, you're trying to manage finite resources. You're trying to spend the least amount possible, right? Whereas with government accounting, you're actually trying to spend as much as possible, because if you don't spend all of that money, then you actually lose it. So you need more people in your program using your services. Um, and I guess the sad commentary is that they will have all these people in their programs who probably shouldn't be in their programs, and then the people who actually need it don't have access to it. But they don't care. They justify it because at least their program gets to stay open, right? They put the wrong people in their programs, and then the real people who actually need help don't get it. So, to expect the government to solve these problems when the government created the problem is really illogical. The government created the problems in the first place, and the government benefits, just like the corporations, they benefit from exploiting population growth, right? So to expect the government to save you from a problem that they created in the first place is almost like procreating and then saving, or expecting Jesus to save you, right? Because we've talked about that before also, that these Christians will impose life onto people, essentially breeding them into hell, and then expecting Jesus to save their children from the hell that they put their children in the first place, right? So you put your child into this oppressive matrix, and now you expect the government to save you. So you think that the government actually has a desire to save you from these conditions which they created in the first place. No, they don't give a shit. And at the same time, they're promoting two paradoxical narratives. On one hand, at the local level, they're telling you to procreate. They're telling you that we don't have enough people, that there's a birth decline. We need to increase the birth rates. Even at the national level, they're trying to create all these incentives for people to procreate, right? But at the global level, they're saying the complete opposite. They're saying that we have too many people and we should actually lower our population rates, right? Our population growth. They're saying the complete opposite. So who the hell do you believe? Um, I would be more inclined to believe the global narrative, because I guess they have a more of a broader perspective. They're looking at this more holistically. They're looking at all these countries, and they're looking at all of these problems, and they're looking at how the resources are being shifted from country to country, that the third world countries are being robbed of their natural resources to sustain the so-called wealthier countries. Um, and they already know this is not sustainable. So though the environmentalists, the real environmentalists, not the bullshit environmentalists who are going to tell you to continue procreating and just recycle and just get a green vehicle, that's bullshit. Um, if you really want an honest reflection on this, look at the European Green Party, not the Green Party in the United States, because the Green Party in the United States, I don't know what to say about them, but they haven't really caught up to the research on um, population control. But the Green Party in Europe they'll tell you the truth. Um, I really didn't want to go here, but the Green Party in Europe is against mass migration specifically because it is bad for the environment and because it does lower everybody's quality of life when they're competing for jobs and limited resources. So the Green Party in Europe is for population control. And again, I'm not talking about population control through compulsion. I'm not talking about rounding up people and sterilizing them. I'm talking about through incentivized population control, meaning instead of rewarding people for having more kids, you should reward people for having fewer kids. Those of us who are responsible and not having so many damn children, we're the ones who should be getting the damn tax cuts. We should be having tax incentives. We should be paying fewer taxes because we're consuming fewer resources, right? Why should we have to subsidize everybody else's gluttonous reproductive practices? Why should we have to pay for everybody's decisions to procreate? Um, it's not fair. It's not fair. We get penalized. We don't even get any assistance with student loan forbearance or deferment because, well, if you're a single person without any children, then you're not. They don't consider you to have a financial hardship based on your If I would have had 5 kids, then I would be considered a financial hardship case. But I don't have any damn children, so I can't afford. I have all this fucking expendable or disposable income, according to them, right? So they can just take my money because I don't have any children. If I would have some children, then they would have more compassion for me. So it's just so ass backwards to the way they reward people for being irresponsible. But at the same time, the reason that they are rewarding irresponsible reproductive practices is because they get to exploit it. They already know that if you have a bunch of children, they're going to be able to give you lower wages, that they're just going to have a larger voting base that they can sell some bullshit political policies that don't necessarily benefit anybody. Um, but it doesn't matter. They don't care about you. They care about increasing their damn numbers. That's all they care about. And so I want you to understand that your interests, right? Your interests are not the same as the government's interests. So when you listen to Elon Musk, which I believe he has 5 children, absolutely ridiculous considering his level of affluence. Or maybe he has more, but I believe he has 5. And he's saying that we need to have more children. JD Vance is saying the same thing, talking about cat ladies. The cat ladies are more responsible. The cat ladies are preserving our quality of life. They're not reproducing to excess to where we're all going to have to be scrambling to try to find housing and a job, right? Again, our population growth isn't necessarily due to fertility rates. It's mostly due to migration, but all of these things are factored in. And so even if we do reproduce, it really has to be both, because that's what those socialist countries in Europe are doing. They have reduced their fertility rates and they have implemented migration control. So they have very strict immigration policies and they have incentivized reducing their population. That's why they're able to have a high quality of life and have all of socialist policies. Now let me see if I have any comments. Okay. Yeah. The government isn't going to save you. The government is a damn problem. So let me just explain this to y'all, because I don't know why in America nobody really talks about overpopulation. But when I was in my master's program, this really was my thesis that I really did research this very thoroughly. And even my professors didn't believe it because, again, this isn't really being taught in the United States. It's really being taught in Europe. So most of most of my sources were European sources. I really did not find a lot of data in the United States arguing for population control. But population increases through 3 mechanisms: birth rates exceeding death, immigration from other countries, and people living longer due to medical advances. Even if fertility rates in the United States drop significantly, our population would likely continue growing due to immigration and increasing lifespans. The U.S. accepts over 1 million legal immigrants annually, plus refugees and asylum seekers. Each immigrant represents additional resource consumption, housing demand, and infrastructure pressure. Meanwhile, medical advances continue extending human lifespans. While longer lifespans might seem unquestionably positive, they contribute to the population growth by keeping more people alive simultaneously. A society where people live to 85 instead of 75 will have significantly more people alive at any given moment, even with identical birth rates. I mean, I want y'all to let that sink in. So the reason why, even if you reduced or procreated at replacement rate, it's still going to be an increase in population because people are living longer. So not only are we seeing people with grandchildren, we're seeing with people with great grandchildren and great great grandchildren. Um, y'all know Whoopi Goldberg is a great grandmom, and what is she in her 60s? That's what's going on right here. Um, People are living longer. People are procreating. Well, a lot of people are waiting until their 30s, but people are also reproducing at very young ages. Um, I guess those who have a desire to pursue education usually wait until they're in their 30s, but a lot of people are still procreating at very young ages. And it's almost like the poorer you are, the more children you're inclined to have. But I'm not here to poverty shame. This is not about poor people. I think the wealthy should have fewer children, not the poor people. So even if you believe the current problems can be managed through better technology and resource distribution, we still have to face a hard truth. There are physical limits to what engineering and redistribution can accomplish. Every solution to overpopulation creates new problems or has diminishing returns. We can build higher density housing, but that increases stress, reduces privacy, and strain utility. Right? Because you can look at these cities where they have these skyscraping apartment buildings, right? Because there's not enough land to actually spread out and actually have a single story house, right? You have to go up to the damn sky because there's no damn land anymore. Look at the quality of life in those cities. Rats everywhere, um, pollution, traffic congestion, um, a lack of privacy, right? Because I mean, I don't know if y'all have ever lived up north, but they have these row houses where it's not like in Texas or like southern or midwestern states where you're spread out, right? No, they're row houses. Like the entire street is connected. Like your house is right next to your neighbor's house. There's no privacy. Your neighbor can hear everything going on in your house, almost as if they were in a room right next to you. So, I mean, I grew up in Philly, so I know how those houses. I mean, I could hear my neighbor. Mm. Y'all know what I heard most of the time, more than anything else. I would hear my neighbor beating their kids, and I'm sure they probably heard us getting beaten too. Every time we got beaten with this, I don't want to talk about that, but that's what I heard all the time. I could hear my neighbor beating her damn kids. Um, so let's talk about this optimization trap. Each generation of solutions becomes more complex, more expensive, and more fragile. We're essentially running faster and faster on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. Consider Consider urban family planning. Cities are already pushing the boundaries of what's physically possible. Skyscrapers require enormous energy inputs for elevators, heating, and cooling. Underground infrastructure becomes exponentially more expensive as it gets more complex. Water and sewage problems have physical limits based on pressure and gravity. Um, I want y'all to think about that. So every time there's a problem in one of these skyscraping apartments, and there's, let's say, a power outage, you're going to have to walk up those stairs, right? You're going to have to walk up 50 flights just to get to your damn apartment. Um, That sounds like a damn nightmare, right? And then even when the elevators are working, you're still gonna have to wait for an elevator. Imagine having to bring in your groceries and you have to walk up all those damn stairs or wait for an elevator. Um, that is not a high quality of life. That sounds like a damn nightmare. I don't know anybody who would want to live like that. I guess if you live that way all your life, then you really don't have anything to compare it to. I guess when you live in New York, it you can sort of downplay all of those negative aspects because you have access to entertainment and shopping and food. But no, I think New York is a good place to visit. I would sure as hell would not want to live there. I sure as hell wouldn't want to live in Philadelphia, which is where I grew up. I wouldn't want to live in Chicago. Any of these major cities sound like a damn nightmare. Um, so we can talk about how engineering and resource allocation can compensate for population growth, but eventually you're going to hit a brick wall. You're going to hit a brick wall where there is no amount of technological innovation or resource redistribution that can maintain current quality of life standards for an ever growing population, right? So by the time you hit this brick wall, it's going to be too late. The demographic momentum will make it too late to address the problem through voluntary means, right? And that's when the FEMA camp that all these conspiracy theorists are talking about are going to come into play. They keep talking about how we're going to get round up and thrown in some FEMA camps, and yet they keep pumping out all these damn children, right? Population growth has approximately a 20-year lag time. The people who will be reproducing in 2045 are already born, right? So even if fertility rates drop to replacement level tomorrow, we still see decades of continued population growth. This is why waiting until the crisis becomes undeniable is a strategy guaranteed to fail. I guess I already talked about factory farming. Again, I didn't really stick to my outline, so I guess I will skip to that. But it's really about sustainability and carrying capacity. The fact that we have factory farming, the fact that we have mass agriculture, deforestation means that we are overpopulated. I don't know why people are trying to deny what is right in front of them. And they're really gaslighting us to say that this isn't a problem, right? I mean, we already have all the evidence right in front of us. So they're going to use every excuse imaginable to avoid the obvious solution. They're going to tell you to go vegan, recycle more, consume less, buy organic, support sustainable farming, or vote for politicians who promise environmental reform. All of these suggestions dance around a fundamental issue while refusing to name it. You can recycle every bottle, drive a hybrid car, and eat nothing but locally sourced vegetables. But if the population keeps growing, all of your individual sacrifices are meaningless. Going vegan might reduce your personal environmental impact, but it doesn't change the fact that billions of other people will continue eating factory farm meat. Supporting sustainable farming is admirable, but sustainable methods physically cannot scale to feed 8 billion people, let alone 10 plus billion people we're projected to reach. The easiest solution is right in front of all of us. Stop creating more people who need to be fed instead of asking everyone to sacrifice their quality of life to accommodate endless population growth. We could simply acknowledge that fewer people would eliminate the need for these destructive systems entirely. But this solution requires people to question their reproductive choices, which they're psychologically unwilling to do, excuse me. So instead, they'll advocate for every other possible change, no matter how difficult, expensive, or ineffective, rather than address the one factor that would actually solve the problem. It's much easier to blame corporations, governments, or individual consumption habits than to admit that having children contributes to the demand for factory farming and environmental destruction. The cognitive dissonance is so strong that people will literally advocate for global lifestyle changes affecting billions of people rather than reconsider their decision to have 2 to 3 children. Let's talk about AI. So, the most tragic aspect of current population decisions is how they ignore the rapidly approaching reality of artificial intelligence replacing human workers. Everyone knows this is coming. People openly discuss AI and how it will replace drivers, cashiers, accountants, lawyers, doctors, and even creative professionals. We're not talking about some distant future. These changes are happening now and accelerating rapidly. Yet the same people who acknowledge this technological revolution continue creating children who will enter the workforce in 15 to 20 years, right when AI displacement reaches its peak. They're literally creating children who won't have a future in the traditional sense. This is about the timeline. A child born today will be job hunting around 2045. By then, most routine cognitive work will be automated. Even complex professional tasks are being taken over by AI systems. What exactly are parents expecting their children to do for work? The user response is humans will find new types of jobs, but this ignores basic economics. When AI can perform most human tasks more efficiently and cheaply, the value of human labor approaches zero. Even if some new job categories emerge, they'll be competing for positions with billions of other displaced workers. This is perhaps the most selfish act imaginable. Creating a human being to face massive unemployment, economic irrelevance, and social upheaval because parents wanted the emotional satisfaction of having children. These children never consented to being brought into a world where their economic value has been systematically eliminated. People know this is happening. They discuss it at dinner parties and read articles about AI replacing workers. Then they go home and create more future victims of the system they um, can, can clearly see is emerging. It's willful blindness on a massive scale. I already talked about how overpopulation is a direct threat to democracy. It dilutes the power of the individual vote. Democracy was really designed for a much smaller population. Um, when participation scales beyond certain thresholds, democracy institutions begin to break down or become increasingly bureaucratic and unresponsive. Your individual political power, your ability to influence the policies that govern your life, shrinks with every additional person added to the system. This is, oh gosh, I just had a gnat fly directly in my mouth. Excuse me, y'all. This is why overpopulation isn't about resource scarcity, it's about the dilution of individual dignity and democratic participation in society. I've already talked about how people in developed countries consume 20 to 60 times as many resources as those in developing countries. I've talked about climate change. It's much easier to reduce the population than to increase the population and then tell everybody else to sacrifice. Talked about the New World Order, how we're supposed to be rounded up and thrown in FEMA camps, yet they still keep procreating, which makes it manifest destiny. The doomsday prepper contradiction. They keep talking about how they're going to grow vegetables and store water, buy generators, blah, blah, blah. Um, Meanwhile, they're still creating more people who are going to live through these disasters. They keep talking about how dire things are going to get, and yet they're still subjecting their children to these dire dystopian prophecies. Um, I don't understand it. It's so disjointed. It's cognitive dissonance. It's illogical. I mean, you really should judge people based on their actions, not based on their words, their rhetoric. If they really believe that there was this doomsday scenario, coming before us, they would not procreate. But the fact that they do procreate anyway means that they don't actually believe it. So I'm trying to make sure that I didn't actually forget anything. I mean, I just want to bring this back to moral agency, right? We can talk about what the system is supposed to do, what the government is supposed to do, what corporations are supposed to do, but from a deontological perspective, well, and a consequentialist perspective, the only thing that we have moral agency over is our own decisions. We have the ability to procreate or not procreate. We don't have any control over what the government does. The government doesn't listen to us anyway. We don't have any control over what the corporations do. So you can talk about how the government should fairly distribute resources to everybody to make sure that everybody has a high quality of life. Everyone has housing as a human right, healthcare, education, blah, blah, blah. They're not doing it. They're not going to do it. And they're not going to do it specifically because the world is so, or the country is so overpopulated that the government doesn't have to be responsive to its citizens in the first place. So you have already created the quagmire that you're complaining about. You have already created the conditions where socialism is impossible. It's never going to be a fair system where resources are fairly distributed and everyone gets to have an education and good food and health. This is pie in the sky. It's not realistic. The one thing that you have moral agency over is your decision to procreate. And if you did that, at the very least, even if you were going to procreate, at least use your ability to procreate as leverage, right? Which is what I wrote in my book about what blame it on the dress, right? That book was really about homophobia, but I did have a chapter about anti-natalism, and what I said was that, and again, that book was about the Black community, so whatever, it applies to everybody, even though that specific book was about the Black community and homophobia thereof. The argument that I made was that Black people should stop procreating. And if you are going to procreate, use your ability to procreate as leverage against the damn system, right? If you, this applies to everybody, right? This applies to everybody. When the government asks you, why aren't you procreating? You should tell them, I'm not going to procreate because my potential children would not have a future. And I'm saying this even to anti-natalists. We're not going to procreate anyway, but still say it. Just say it rhetorically so that the system will meet our demands. Tell them, I'm not going to procreate because we don't have a living wage. We don't have quality housing. We don't have education. We don't have medical assistance. We don't have the right to medical assistance in dying, right? Tell them this shit. Tell them you're not going to procreate until they meet your damn demands. I guarantee they would listen to you. Because I don't understand. I mean, you don't have any leverage anymore. Not anymore. Because your labor used to be your leverage, but now your leverage is being displaced by migrants. And again, this isn't to displace immigrants. I'm just saying, this is an immutable fact. Your labor is no longer leverage. You're going to be replaced by migrants. You're going to be replaced by AI. The only thing you have is your decision to procreate, because the numbers is what gives legitimacy to the government. It's what gives legitimate or viability to corporations. They need consumers. They need, I don't know that they necessarily need workers anymore. At least not in the future. They're not going to need us. They're not going to need us. But they will always need consumers, right? Even if they do implement, what is that called, where they're supposed to give us some kind of universal wage, universal basic income. They're still going to need consumers. And if you don't produce those consumers, that's going to be the clog in a system that nobody saw coming. And Gary, okay, point in fact, the countries that have already had massive birth declines have already started to cater to the populace, right? Look at all these countries where these Asian countries, these Even in European countries where they have declining birth rates, what are they doing? They're all capitulating to the citizens. They're all saying, "What do you need? What can we do to make you more comfortable so that you will decide to procreate?" Now they want to give health care. Now they want to give child care. Now they want to give education as a basic right. And so you give up your leverage by procreating and giving the system exactly what it wants. By rewarding them, you have already given up your leverage, and they're never going to give you what you want. So you, again, even for the anti-natalists, we're not going to have children anyway. But you don't need to tell them that. You don't need to tell them. Excuse me. I'm sterilized, but I'm not telling them that shit. I'm sterilized, but guess what? I'm going to pretend that if you give me the medical assistance denying that I'm going to pop out some damn, not me personally, but I'm going to, I guess, impregnate some damn woman. I'm going to magically become straight and then I'm going to impregnate some woman. If you would just give me the right to medical assistance denying. No one good and dead well, I'm not going to actually do it, but that is my only leverage. And that is what the system cares about. Y'all see, I said I wasn't going to get political, but y'all see this redistricting going on right now? The reason that they are redrawing these districts is because population matters, right? They want to make sure that they curry enough favor with the people who are going to keep them in power. That's all they care about. That's what the social contract is. So they're going to redraw districts because they don't have enough people in their own districts to keep them in office. So that's what they do. This isn't rocket science. This is political alchemy, right? And if you don't reproduce, then what they would probably have to do is just import new workers. But they would prefer to have you reproduce because, I don't know, I guess you're already assimilated. You're already quote unquote civilized. You already embody the values that they want, the capitalist Christian values that they want. Right. They'll accept the immigrants because they're low wage workers, but they really want you to produce. They want you to reproduce because you maintain the social order. You validate them. They're not even sure that these immigrants are necessarily going to vote for them. The immigrants indirectly are actually a threat to the system because the immigrants are not going to keep those people in power. When the immigrants have enough numbers, they're going to put all those politicians out of office, and they all know it. They all know it. They know that their time is up, but they don't really care because I guess they look at it like, okay, I'll have my career, right, and then by the time I retire, though, I guess I'm going to end this live stream because I don't really want to say anything too controversial. I guess y'all probably already know where I'm going, but the demographic of the politicians that we have right now, they're going to be replaced, and they all know it. Um, they're fine to have the cheap labor, but they don't want to be replaced. They want the migrants to replace you, so you don't have a damn job. They want AI to replace you, but they don't want AI and migrants to replace them, right? So you're holding all the cards, and the main card, I mean, it's not your labor anymore. Your labor no longer has any leverage because they're just going to replace you. The one thing that you can't replace is you and your potential children. So use the only leverage that you have. Don't procreate. Now, let me see if I have any comments because I'm about to get off here. Wow. Thank you so much. This is a rant. I wish y'all could have heard the live stream that I did earlier because I was really cooking on that, but apparently I had audio problems. So I'm going to have to come back and do that all over again. But um, I really did this live stream in response to that woman. What is her name? The permaculture woman, I can't think of the name of her channel. She did this video talking about eugenics again and talking about how overpopulation is a myth. I'm thoroughly convinced that most people don't know what overpopulation means. They don't know what it entails. They don't know the negative impacts of it. I consider myself a semi-expert on it. I mean, I'm not an authority, but I'm an authority enough to where I have been requested to speak on panels to talk about this in academic settings. Um, everybody, I mean, when I was in my master's program, everyone knew that I was the authority in my master's program for population control. So it's the only reason I'm saying is it's because it's so rare. Most people don't know about it. Most people can never give the pushback to explain why it's not a myth. They don't know the problems that are associated with population growth. And there was a documentary, was that last year? Um, I think you have to, it's behind a paywall and it's kind of expensive to buy. It's not on DVD, but it's on their website. I'm going to see if I can find that, and then I guess I can post it to my wall. That documentary was pretty comprehensive, but I don't think anybody saw it. So that documentary pretty much went nowhere. I think I wish more people would watch that documentary. It was a good one. So yeah, remind me. I'm going to post that on my wall for both channels, and then if y'all want me to talk about it more, I can. I don't know what else I can say about it unless you guys have questions. I just don't think people know enough about it. They don't understand what the argument is. So just because people aren't starving now, that does not, or because you could cram everybody into California, that does not mean that overpopulation isn't a problem. It's about quality of life and it's about sustainability. We have one global crisis and we are fucked. We don't have the ability to produce food. We don't have jobs. We are not self-sustaining. And so it is an actual problem. It is a real problem. All right, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. Thank y'all for being here, but I'm not going to do my usual conclusion because I am streaming on both channels. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank y'all, and I will be back soon.